Welcome back, guys, to the channel. You are tuning into our 06 ZX10R build. We had previously pulled the motor. We checked the motor out and we knew that there was a loud knock. We're at the point now where I'm going to try to fix it. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to attempt to. So again, I welcome you back. For those of you that haven't been to this channel before, go ahead and check out those two previous episodes. We'll put a link in the description below. It's basically getting the bike, diagnosing it, and ripping the engine out. A little bit of work, but we got it done. Now we're on for the hard part of the job, and that's, again, rebuilding the motor, or at least the bottom half. I've never done this before, so I'm right with you right now. If you're watching this channel thinking, I don't know how to do this, I need to learn, well, I'll learn on my behalf. So let's go ahead and move forward. I know that this pan has to come off. That said, there was 8mm bolts all the way around it. I'm going to pull those out, pull this thing back, and we'll look in the bottom of this thing. All right, guys, so you see that the bolts are out now. I'm going to go ahead and tap this thing just a little bit from the back right here. And pull this off. So let's see how bad this really is. Well, there's a little oil in it, but not a whole lot of metal, honestly. There's almost no metal. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. There's almost no metal shavings. Maybe some metal fragmented dust. That's pretty typical for wear on any engine. But nothing crazy. So, I'm doing a little bit of research. Again, it looked like the transmission was on the back side of the crank, which is exactly what we want. Well, potentially. I want to be able to pull this thing out and not have to take that transmission out. So if I can do that, that's great. So what I want to look for now, I'm going to turn the engine over and over, and I'm going to see where maybe I can find play within the rod bearings, which would be back in here. It's going to be hard to do that with the camera right here. I'm just kind of in a bad position, the way the garage is set up right now. I'm going to see if I can see anything. I'll be right back. All right, I can't seem to get my fingers far enough up there to check if there is any kind of play. What I'm wanting to do is take the crank and turn it back and forth to see which one I'm getting maybe a tap out of, because it was pretty loud. So I imagine the bearing is pretty much gone at that point. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm trying to kind of figure out where the crank is and line it up. I think I'm going to take off this side cover here. And possibly the other side to see if I can get, there's got to be a crank, end of the crank somewhere with a bolt on it that I can spin this thing over. So I'm going to try this side first. All right, so after further inspection, the very first thing I removed is this tiny little hole here, and I saw a star bit, but man, I thought there's no way that that's what you'd use to turn over the end of the crank, and just to test it, it actually does. So what I need to do is I need to try to get maybe a non-ratcheting wrench that I can go back and forth and see if I can get any play out of those rod bearings. So I'm going to test that. I'm going to see if I get anything, and if not, we'll move to the next step. All right, so no luck trying to go back and forth from what I can tell. So my next step is going to be taking out the spark plugs to relieve the compression, because this thing still has incredible compression. You can hear it hiss and whistle as I'm moving that crank, so I know that the compression's good. However, I'd like to go ahead and do a compression test, but at the same time, maybe if I turn it over with the starter, I might be able to hear which rod bearing's going with the stethoscope. I mean, odds are, more than likely, I'm probably going to have to just take all this out. I really didn't want to, but there's usually not an easy way out of that. So I'll probably end up having to take the whole transmission, clutch basket, everything out, and split this bottom half of the case. If I have to, it is what it is. I don't mind doing it. Again, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but once I take it apart, I can usually get it back together. So let me go ahead and do some compression testing, see what that shows me, and we'll move forward from there. All right, so I've pulled out all 4 spark plugs, and here they are right here. Now, when I turned the crank over, as I stated, I went ahead and looked at all the cylinders the best I could, and I couldn't see anywhere on the cylinders. Typically, if you have a rod brake or a really bad bearing, the piston will kind of go up like this, if that makes any sense. It won't go up straight up and down, and it'll mar the crap out of the outside of the cylinder wall. And it doesn't look like this at all. Another good thing to look for is when you lose, a lot of times, rod bearings, that piston wants to move up just a little bit more maybe than it did. And a lot of times, or if it broke, for example, it will smash the tip of the spark plug down by the piston hitting it. And I'm looking at all 4 of these spark plugs, and they all look really good. So that is good news. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hook a battery up to this thing. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to get the compression tests. Hopefully, I think they're supposed to be around 200, but we'll find out. All right, so the compression tester's hooked up. You're going to want to go ahead and pry open your throttle body to make sure that it's held open so you get your best results. I'm going to go ahead and touch the battery right now, and I'm going to try to get this thing to turn over. We'll see what it does. All right. So first one reads, it looks like 165, which seems kind of low. Though I also seen some stuff blowing out of there. I don't know if it was gas or what that is. I also don't know if I have it in there that great on this cylinder, because I only got in there a few turns. I'm not really sure why. But I'm gonna go ahead and try the next 2 through 4. Yeah, 185-ish. Hmm, 165. Right around 180. So keep in mind something I didn't tell you guys, this bike's been sitting for 3 years, so this might be a lot like our other ZX10 build, where it read really low, and the more I turned it over, and after I finally started it got all the way up to like 200. Could be the same scenario. The PSI isn't bad. 2 of them being 165, 2 of them being around 180-ish is it's pretty close, especially with the buildup that's probably on the valves from not running for that long. That's hardened up. So I'm gonna assume that's okay. The good news is I didn't hear any cracking or popping coming from the bottom end, which is good and bad, because that means that I can't really tell which one's bad. But on a positive note, we know the top end's turning over smoothly. So let's go ahead and move forward. Alright guys, so I decided to use my brain, a little common sense, and thought, what's another way I could test to see if I have play in a bearing? And then I thought about it. The spark plugs are out. What if I was to stick, let's say, a long extension down to the top of the piston, and then a long screwdriver on the bottom of the piston, and move it back and forth while the crank is dormant and still? And look what I found. I don't know if you can see that or not. Image stabilization. That is, and you can probably hear it too. But that is our bad one so far. There might be more than one, but that's at least one. And it's about, it looks like both bearings, because that's about 1/8 inch, I'd say. It could be very good chance that both bearings are out of that one. But I'm going to go through the next 3 cylinders. I'm going to see if they have any play. If they do, then we're just going to rip this bottom end off, and we're going to start ordering parts. Alright, so on testing the other 3 cylinders, there's absolutely no play that I could tell whatsoever. So it's just this first cylinder over here on the, I guess it would be the left-hand side when you're sitting on the bike. But the reality is, if you're going to take it all the way down the crank, you don't just do one rod bearing, you do all of them. It kind of makes sense. The good news is if those other rod bearings aren't worn, maybe it'll give me a number and I know which one to order. That may not be the case, because they could be worn, or the damaged one could be damaged. So I don't know. We won't know until we get the crank apart and look at it. It does have quite a bit of play. The other side is, what made the rod bearing fail? I know that this thing like had no oil in it whatsoever, and I don't know if that was because it was in storage or whatever, but was it ran like that, or, you know, was there a shortage of fuel maybe that caused that thing to detonate and just, I don't know, have problems? So I'm going to look at the piston from the top real quick, and then I think we're going to start tearing in this motor and just pull everything off, because let's be honest, we know we have to take it off to get to that far inner one. I can't get to it otherwise. So let's go ahead and move forward. Alright, so the piston looks good from what I can see. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. Before we pull anything out of the bottom, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull out, we need to get our clutch and our clutch cover, everything, all the basket and everything out of there. We also need to get the stator gears and stuff, or the starter gear and stuff out of here. So that has to come out, as well as the starter. We'll pull all that out. We'll get the other side off over there, and we'll start taking the bolts out to split this thing. Alright, so before we go to the clutch cover, I'm going to go ahead and take off the starter gear cover. It's kind of difficult. I took all the bolts around it, realized it wouldn't come off. So then I took out these 5 bolts and the smaller cover, and you really have to kind of pry it off. You can see right here is the gear that goes inside there. Technically speaking, it goes this way. But you got to pry all the way around it evenly, and then it'll pop off. And then there's another 8mm bolt that's holding on the rest of the fascia here that I'm going to pull out right now. So I'm going to get that off, and then we're going to work on the clutch assembly and get it out. We'll move forward from there. Alright, so another little tip for you guys. What I typically do when I'm taking things apart, I kind of set everything together in order in which I take them apart. And I usually put all the bolts back where they go, so I don't get mixed up. The particular pan I didn't because I have to clean the inside of it out. It's got oil in it a little bit, so I just threw the bolts in it. But typically that's what I'll do. I'll lay everything out in a row. That way when I put it back together, I just kind of go in reverse. Kind of helps you remember what you're doing, especially if you're not doing videos like I am. So anyhow, moving forward, we're going to get the rest of this off. There's the case cover off. As you'll see, I got some gears to slide out, and then I'm going to start pulling off that clutch. And clutch cover removed. There's our complete basket. All I'm going to have to do now is to take out these 6 different Allen heads here. These springs will lift up, and we'll be able to pull most of this out. There will probably be a nut below it somewhere, but we can get a majority of this out. We're going to keep that all together as well. Something to keep in mind with many bikes, you don't want to mix up your clutch, basically your plates. I believe a lot of times it's the first one, sometimes it's just the last one, but they're offset compared to the rest, if you'll notice that. You don't want to mess that up, but just keep in mind, taking it apart, you want to put it basically back together exactly the same to make sure you kind of keep it in order as best you can. All right, so there's all our plates. Again, doing your best to try to, not what I'm doing, keep them straight aligned. It seems like they're sliding away on me, but try to keep them in order. Here's our basket here. I got to take out this nut here. These retainers will pop out as well, and this whole thing should lift out. And then I know there's some things underneath that have to come out as well. Technically speaking, you might be able to get away with not taking this clutch off, considering the fact that transmission's coming out. It might come out in whole. However, I'm not going to risk it. I'm just going to take it out, just be careful, so I can keep that transmission together when I pull it out, because I obviously don't want to mix up any gears or anything. So let me go ahead, I'll get this nut out. It looks like it's probably like a, I don't know, maybe a 25 millimeter or 27, but I'll tell you what that is here in a second. All right, so it is in fact a 27 millimeter. I used an impact and slightly tapped it as I was holding the basket. It wanted to spin a little bit, but it broke loose without killing my hand, so that's good news. So here we can see, I don't know if I can do this with one hand, but I'm gonna try my best. Maybe we have to do it separately. I can see the edge of the crank kind of stops the basket itself. So let's go ahead and pull this out here. Set that aside. And the center section we're gonna pull out, set that aside. Again, keeping in mind we're gonna stack these back the way they go because we don't want anything to get messed up in the meanwhile. And then I think I'm going to need 2 hands for this, but it looks like, I don't know if I'm going to get that out or not, but we'll see if I do. All right, so I figured it out. Basically, I had to slide this piece out of the center. I just kind of shook them both together until this came out. Then I was able to essentially kind of wiggle this thing down and out and pull it out. So there it is, all complete and taken out. So we're good there. Now I think I need to flip it over on the other side and get the stator out. I mean, it literally never stops. It's like a baby. It just keeps going and going. Anyhow, we got it flipped over, letting some oil drain out on that pan there. We've got another pan that we have to grab, and we've got to get it over here underneath the stator side, just in case any oil comes out of there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull out the 8mm bolts around this. We'll open it up to see the stator and see what we've got to take out on that side. And there you can see the stator cover's off. The stator is actually built inside of the cover. So here's our, I believe what they call a rotor. Normally I'd have to use a flywheel tool to pop this off, but considering the fact that the case is split right here, I don't know that I need to take it off. So I'm going to skip that for now. Hopefully, we had to take the cover off, but hopefully I won't have to pull that off. I don't have to. I can. They're just kind of a pain sometimes. But what I'm going to do now, I know that before I start splitting this case, I need to take the oil cooler. It doesn't necessarily have to come off, but it's got to be separated from the pump, the coolant pump here, the water pump. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that there. Then I think we're going to dive in. We're going to start loosening up some of these bolts. In fact, it looks like I do have to take, you probably can't see right there, there's a bolt down in there, back in here. So I may have to take off that cooler or split it in half. Either way, I'll show you what that looks like and what we have to do. All right, so as you guys can see, I went ahead and split the oil cooler. Now I'll just kind of set this thing off to the side. But while I have it off, as you see, it made a mess because obviously it poured oil out because it always retains oil. Anyhow, while I have it out, I'll probably go ahead and look at the filter. At some point, we might cut that open because keep in mind, our rod bearings went somewhere. I don't know where they are. They weren't in the oil, a very minimal amount of them, but they went somewhere. Question is, where do they go? And when you do something like this, or you have a catastrophic engine failure, you need to go through stuff like this to make sure that there's no metal shavings in it that are going to go back into your motor after you've rebuilt it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off, get it out of the way, set these things aside. And I think we're going to start pulling out these bolts to start splitting this case. All right, so just before I start taking out these bolts, I want to make sure there's nothing else where our case is split to be in the way. I did realize there's a tube right there that's going to have to get pulled off. Not a big deal, I'll separate that. I don't see anything else, but following, I see that we got one 10mm bolt there. Got basically 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12mm bolts on the top. And I don't know how the bottom's connected as of right now, so I'll have to look into that. We'll get those out and see where we're moving from there. Alright guys, so we have our main studs out of the way. Go ahead and loosen it up, and they're just sitting there. I had to use an impact, or you can do by hand, but you're not going to get it done with a little tiny 1/4" impact. Then I realized, well, that's just the centers. I need to look on the outsides, and then realize there's all these 8mm bolts on the top. And then upon further inspection, you can kind of see the bottoms of some nuts. I don't know if you can see that or not. Right there. So I think I'm going to have to take those out first. Because we want the engine to stay in this position so we can pull that thing straight up and back. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. I'll take out the back 2 ones or whatever other ones I see, then these last 8, and hopefully this thing will slide off without the transmission running away from us. Alright, so you can see I just pulled out these 2 bolts right here that were the 8mm. Then I realized, I'm kind of looking at the casings, there's got to be more than that. And I realized these bolts here have to come out. You can see where they kind of channel all the way down to the other side of the case. And if there's 2 there, there's definitely going to be 2 over here. So we're going to go ahead and take all those out, flip this thing back over, and get this thing split. Alright, so I got the 3 of them out. The 4th one I actually had to do by hand. Sometimes you got to do things by hand. It didn't sound right. I ain't right. Anyhow, let's go ahead and move forward. Let me get these other 8mm bolts out so we can get this thing split. Alright, so it's not wanting to pry apart. I was taking basically a light mount like that, just trying to tap it free. Usually it breaks free. It's not coming free. And I realized that our pickup coil also has to be removed because it's on both sides of the case. I don't see anything else, and I don't know. Usually you don't have to split it. You don't have to take off timing to split it. At least you didn't with the R1. I'm not sure if that's the case on this one or not, but I'm going to go ahead and take off that pickup coil, see if it makes a difference. So it's like a game. I found another one. There's another bolt right there, if you can see it. I can tell that goes across the cases. I'll have to look at the other side. I don't know if there's one on the other side or not, so I'll just keep on looking until this thing breaks free. I swear this thing has more coolant than a semi-truck. It is absolutely insane. Anyhow, doing a little bit more surfing. Found that bolt right there. As you can probably see, kind of just above this, it's an 8mm. That's the last one I can see would be anywhere, unless there's something behind the water pump here. I don't see how there would be. I don't see any areas for it to attach to right here, so I don't think there is. This side definitely loosened up a little bit by taking the 1 bolt out, so let me get that one out and try it again. Alright, so I went ahead and looked at the schematics, and there are 2 bolts that I'm missing. And you can see one there, and the other one's just behind it, back a little bit farther back there. It's tough to see, so I gotta get those 2 out, and then if this case doesn't split, I don't know what's gonna happen. So let's go ahead and get those out. Alright guys, so here you can see splitting as I tap it lightly. That's what we want to see. You almost never want to stick a flathead screwdriver there and pry it apart because you'll end up jacking up your surfaces. Just a bad idea. So obviously I can't do this with the camera in my hand, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to split these. And again, hopefully keeping an eye on all to make sure none of this falls out because that could be a headache. So I'm going to go ahead and get that split. All right, so the bottom's off. That is fantastic, and you can see it sitting right there. So everything kind of held in place. The tranny is just kind of setting in there, so that's why it's kind of sitting vertical right now. I'm trying to keep the bolts in and keep the tranny in. Tranny's obviously more important than the bolts. The bolts gotta fall, they gotta fall, but right now it seems to be holding. So if you can keep it vertical like that, you'll probably be okay. The only headache will be, actually not even a headache, because when you go to seal, you're gonna put the sealant on this side. So it doesn't really matter. Anyhow, here is the top half of the motor, and mid half, I guess. And here's our problem child right here. This is where we saw the plate going back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off this lower half of the crank rod. And we're going to look at the lack of bearing that's there and see how bad the crankshaft is. Alright, so I feel like I have to show you this before I pull these out. I don't know if you can be able to see it from that angle, but that is super bad. Like, it literally has to be no bearing at all. Best case scenario, actually, because that could be a destroyed crank with that much play. Now, let me pull these off real quick. Alright guys, let's do this together. I haven't slipped it off yet. I don't know how bad it is, but we're about to find out. Well, can see that or not. There's a little grime, for sure. There's definitely no bearing at all in it. I mean, you can see that. We assumed there wasn't, but there's definitely no bearing at all. Oh man. Maybe there is a bearing. Crankshaft shot, I can't tell. I need to be able to slide the piston up to get it out of the way, unless I turn the crank backwards. Maybe I can do that. Let me try to turn this thing out. I'll pull this thing apart. Alright, all I did was turn the crankshaft backwards. There are bearings. You can see it's trying to fall off it right now. Oh. It's paper thin and totally wore out. If you can see that or not, it's basically no good. I mean, literally it's paper thin. There's another one down in here, I can see. Also just as bad. I mean, I don't know if the camera will pick that up. You can see how thin that is. It's pretty bad. The crankshaft actually doesn't look terrible. I'm kind of surprised, but also pleasantly happy. I don't know for sure without getting all the oil off it. But it doesn't look really tore up. I mean, I can feel it's a little coarser than what you might be wanting to have. Maybe I'll have to have an engine shop look at it. But I don't think it's that bad, to be honest with you. So I need to get some more taken out. At least one more so I can figure out what the numbers are on it. It looks like this thing's been rebuilt before. Somebody's numbered it. You know, I don't know if that's normal from the factory or not. And this could have been a situation where somebody rebuilt it and didn't know what they were doing. I don't know. That's just could be a guess. But anyhow, let's go ahead and get this next one off. All right, guys. So there's the next one out, and here is the bearing itself. You can see there is some wear. It's the copper center. So basically the outer coating is wore off. So it's probably about time to replace that as well. I want to show you the difference between the wore out ones, the real wore out ones, and that one. So the material didn't really go away, it just expanded. In fact, if you look at it, you can see how it wrapped around, basically coming down the side of the rod, where this material doesn't typically do that. So yeah, these pretty much all need replaced. So what we'll end up doing is, which I said before we're going to do anyways, we're going to go through and replace all these. And possibly, I haven't looked at the case bearings yet either. Those might need to be replaced as well. If you're already in there and doing it, you might as well do it. So we're going to do it the right way, make sure that's done. When you look at the bad one here, looking at a camera and kind of a zoomed with a zoomed lens on it, you can kind of see the wear a lot better than you can in real life. I think that's just because cameras amplify everything. Even that's supposed to be really smooth, and it is, but you can't really tell. But it looks probably worse than it really is. But I got to mic these things to make sure they're the same as the others, to make sure the crankshaft's any good. If not, you know, you could obviously order a new crankshaft, which we may, or you might order a different bottom end, or just a whole new engine. I don't know which way we're going to go, but I would like to try to get this thing running in its condition it is, as cheap as possible and the right way. So kind of a mix of both. So I got to do some research. I got to figure out what bearings these are. They say something strange on them, like NXD or something there. It's hard to see. I don't know if that's NDG 5X5i. I'm not sure. Anyhow, we'll figure that out, but let me go check that out. I'll be back. Alright, so this may not be as cheap as an adventure as I thought. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how I am measuring my my journals. I think that's what they're called. So when I go like this here, I don't know if you can see this here, I got it tightened down and locked right here, where there is basically no play whatsoever up and down. And then when I turn it this way, you can kind of see there it's 1/16 of an inch difference. That means this thing's ovaled out. The crankshaft is no good. So either we are going to have to find a new crankshaft, or a new bottom end, or just a whole new motor. So either way, worst case scenario, if I had to replace the motor, it's not a big deal. It's like $2,000. That still we fare pretty well in the deal of this bike. But I would like to be able to, you know, finish this video and show you guys how to rebuild it. I think you guys get kind of the hint of that. But I'm gonna do some research. I'll be back and I'll let you know how we move forward with it. Alright guys, after figuring out that the crankshaft is bad, I did a little research and decided there's two different options to go on this build. One is going to be either buying a used engine, which we have sourced locally for $1,500, which is actually a really good deal, or else rebuilding the current engine that you see here. Now, one of the problems with rebuilding the current engine is because these crankshafts are known to bend very easy on the 06, 07 models, or warp, I should say, which may have been what happened on the side, I don't know. I hate to buy a used one and have it do the same thing or already be warped. So that is a potential problem there, but I think really what's going to determine it is going to be the factoring in the numbers and what it costs. So on the top left, you'll see that the complete engine used that we sold to Oracle is $1,500. We have determined in parts by going through eBay and looked at sold listings, the parts that are left over minus the crankshaft that's bad on this comes to roughly about $1,400 after eBay fees in value. So essentially, buying a used engine and replacing it, it only costs us $100. Now, if I go the other way, if I decide that I want to rebuild the bottom end on this thing, we got about $520 in parts. That's $320 for a used crank. You got $160 for new rod bearings, and then roughly $40 for the rod bolts that can't be renewed or reused. That totals you $520. Now, if you look at the difference here, for $520, I have to go through rebuilding all this, but I have a new, somewhat new bottom end. If I buy a used engine, it's only $100 out of pocket. It's easier to throw in, and the only thing I have to worry about is putting this on a shelf and listing it for sale, which is not a problem. We have a great person to work with, and actually it brings up our next sponsor is Jet Motorsports of Midwest. They are a great company. You can find them online at jetmotorsports.net. They are a great, fantastic company. We've been working with them for a long time, and they provide fantastic parts. So anyways, you guys might want to check those out if you're looking for parts. Anyhow, I think the route we're going to go is probably the complete engine replacement. Again, I hate getting this far into it and kind of not going through the rest, but I don't want to put it back together and have a used crank that's, you know, we don't know if it's going to match up with the bearings and whatnot. It could be a headache and a long, drawn-out process. Whereas I could slap another engine on this, get my money back out, and we'll figure out where we were on the entire build. So let's go ahead and move forward, and let's see if we can get that thing ordered.